So thanks for joining me tonight. It's the beginning of a new year. We're pretty excited I'm pretty excited anyways to get back out on tour. I'm hitting the road next week. We go to Monroe, Louisiana for the first stop on the Bass Pro Tour. I think our first practice day is next Wednesday. So, I've been doing a lot of preseason prep, up here in Michigan where I'm from. It's been kind of snowy and cold. Been getting all my tackle together, kind of getting things sorted. This first trip is going to be, a pretty important one starting the season out. So we just got a lot of things going on for sure. And, all over the country, we finally hit this cold snap. And, it's that time of year where it's winter fishing. And it varies a lot from the, areas and different lakes and things like that. On the different styles of fishing that really work. I mean, you can finesse fish, if you got a real clear, deep body of water, like a Table Rock or a Smith Lake or Lake Lanier or Hartwell, something like that. But also there's a lot of shallower stained lakes and some of the lakes in the south that have a lot of grass. And, crankbaits are something that I just have a ton of confidence in. But cold water cranking is a different scenario. It takes, different setups, a different mentality, different baits and all that. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to kind of get into that. I'm going to go through my rod, reel, set up the baits, some of the little tricks and things that we do. But before we do that, because it's a new year, there's a lot of new products, a lot of new exciting things happen. One thing that I really wanted to kind of kick off is I'm really excited that we're going to start a new live series with Strike King and Lose for their King of Bass. So last year on tour, the King of Bass followed, myself and some of our other pros around, both on the Bass Pro Tour and on the Elite Series. This year, we're doing the same thing again, but we're also kicking off King of Bass Live. So it's basically going to be a live show that starts next Monday is going to be our first episode. Tom Brubaker from Rather Outdoors, he's going to, be co-host with me. And we're going to have a lot of different guests on, to start off the season. My first guest is Mark Zona, and we got Andy Montgomery. And we're going to kind of preview, the Bass Pro Tour event. We're going to preview the first Elite Series event and talk about a lot of the things that are relevant real time. And that's the awesome thing about a live show is that you can be current with what's happening. You can talk about, where, the fish are biting at the time and where a lot of our guys are, because our team is really diverse and really spread around all over the country. So we're going to really do our best to teach you better ways to catch fish, what's happening in your area at the time, and some of these, pros' real tricks for that particular season. So that's going to be something that's going to be a lot of fun that we're kicking off again next Monday. So we'll post some more stuff on that on the Strike King Lose site, myself, kicking this off. So it's really something that I'm pretty fired up with, and we're going to do it all season long. So on top of that, we're always looking at new products and things like that. I've got some new things, to kind of showcase in that tonight in this cold water cranking series that we're going to do. And it should be a lot of fun. So we're going to keep it live, keep it fun. We're going to be able to answer some questions, through it at the end. But first and foremost, I want to kind of go through my cranking system. So again, cold water is really relative. It can be, super cold in places here in the north. Everything's frozen up right now. Up here, it's really hard to do that. But, tomorrow there's a pro circuit event that starts at Sam Rayburn. You may be in Florida, you may be, in the Mid-South area. So water temperature is one of the things that is, I think, highly overrated in the activity level of fish. What I'm really looking for more than anything when I go to a body of water, whether, again, it's a Highland Reservoir like a Table Rock or a Grand Lake, something like that, or Sam Rayburn or Gunnersville or even Lake Lanier. So water clarity is really, really critical. I am paying attention to the water temperature, but it's really the habitat, the structure, and the different types of cover that are available that really help me decide on what bait I should use, what depth range I should focus on, and really the mood and activity level of the fish. Because I can tell you this, that 45-degree water in Texas is a lot colder than 45-degree water in Michigan. You know, the bass are going to be a lot more active in these more northerly lakes or these deeper, clear lakes that are colder to begin with. They're more acclimated to that than they are in these flatter, shallower places. You know, when you get a huge cold front in northern Florida, it can be just devastating down there. I mean, the Florida strain bass can really shut off. And that's another big factor is, you know, largemouth are probably a little bit more susceptible to these fronts in their mood than a smallmouth or a spotted bass is. So I keep that in mind. You know, if you go to a place like Table Rock and you have all three species you can focus on, it really makes a difference there. You know, I may target the smallmouth and the spots if the water gets real cold, just because I know they're more active than largemouth in that same situation. So those are the real keys. And the other big thing is whether you're fishing, you know, rock, wood, grass, what cover type, and then what the predominant forage is. Now, just about everywhere is got, you know, crawfish as a primary forage this time of year. Through the winter, early spring, pre-spawn, crawfish are a primary forage. You know, there's just a ton of different crawfish colors, and red baits are really popular, especially in Texas, you know, this time of the year. And there's no doubt that that's a serious factor. But the other big thing is, you know, shad. And if you get cold conditions again, you start to get a shad die off. The fish can really focus on that. So I'm thinking of that a little bit in my presentation, and my color choice is, you know, what the forage is or what you're seeing. If you're seeing a lot of bait on your graph, or if you're not seeing anything at all, you know, that's giving me a clue to, you know, that I should use crawfish type patterns or brim patterns. You know, there's a little bit of different forage base just about everywhere that you go, and it's real critical to know that. For instance, you go to the southeast, you go down there to Hartwell, Lanier, where they have blueback herring. Those fish act totally different because of that nomadic way that the herring are, the way they roam around. That this time of year, you know, they're there one day and gone the next, and they're really focused on those herring and not near as much about crawfish or other species. So you really got to kind of understand that. And then the other thing is, on the lake that you're fishing, know where to look, what structurally to be targeting. You know, I mean, in the winter doesn't mean that bass necessarily go deep, especially if they have colored water or stained water. You know, they'll stay shallow. And you see that in a lot of cases on lakes that get drawn down. You know, if you go to Douglas Lake, for instance, in Tennessee, you know, it gets drawn down, you know, just like 50 feet. And what happens is it exposes a lot of those mud banks, and every time the wind blows, even though the water is fairly clear, it'll dirty up some of those areas, and that'll move fish shallow, and they'll stay shallow kind of all winter long in those types of lakes like that. Or if we get a big rain and the lake's low like that, it tends to dirty them up a lot quicker, or the backs of the creeks and things like that. And those fish will make a short migration. You know, they're going to go where the food's at. And when you have that colored water, it does definitely keep fish shallower. One thing that I really rely on is my lake master mapping for this time of the year. You know, it really shows me when I go into a creek or go into an area, you know, where the creek channels are, where the deeper water comes closer to the bank, you know, where a bluff end is, where the creek swings against a flat. Those are really, really critical. Whether you're in the back of a creek or you're fishing a main lake point or whatever, understanding that just makes it so much easier to not only find the fish, but to pattern them once you find an area where they're at. You know, the strike zone's going to be a little smaller. So, you know, once you find the right type of structure, right type of cover, right type of bank, and all of those can be a little bit different depending on the lake you're on, you want to be able to duplicate that. For instance, when I go to Table Rock Lake, that is a lake that it's all about bank transitions. You know, you want to physically look with your eyes and go up there and go down the bank and see where, you know, the table rock or the flat rock meets chunk rock, or chunk rock meets gravel. And I'll experiment with all of those different areas. And when I get a bite on a certain type of bank, that's what you really want to duplicate. So location is critical for wintertime fishing. But what I still love is that these crankbaits are so efficient at covering a lot of water this time of year, even when it's cold. and getting fish to bite. One of the real important things when you're cranking in cold water is it's really important to have good bottom contact in the depth that you're in. So, I'm going to have multiple setups with different sizes of line to really allow me to do that. And I'm going to, choose different baits for that same reason as well. So, all of my rods are going to be somewhat similar. I love to throw, about a 7-foot medium action. I've got a new signature series from Lou's that we have in that these are really nice high-end rod. Comes, with a different handle than my standard tour grade. And it's just really high components and things like that. But, also, my CC1 and CC2, these are phenomenal rods. I mean, they're basically, $100. They're composite. Both of these blanks, graphite glass composite, and that's really, really important this time of year. You want a slower action rod. It allows that bait to deflect better off of the rocks or the stumps or when you rip it free from the grass. And more importantly, too, when the bass actually eats it, it allows them to get the bait a little bit deeper. Using a composite rod is just, to me, is critical for cranking because you get the best of both worlds. The graphite built into the blank gives you the sensitivity so you can feel, if there's a tiny little bit of hydrilla on your rear hook or a little bit of slime on there, but also it has that slower reaction when you're cranking it and deflecting that bait off of rocks to allow that bait to have its best action. So, and fishing close to cover is still critical. When the water's cold and especially it gets dirty, these fish get to real tight to the rocks or lay downs or boat docks. So being able to make a good accurate cast is important. So if you're on a lake that has a lot of boat docks and channel swing, chunk rock banks, and it's low, making a good accurate cast is real important. So having a little bit shorter rod is critical. So my favorite target rod is this CC1. It's a 6.5 foot medium action rod. It's perfect for square bills, but I can throw really any of these crankbaits when I'm really going for accuracy and I've got a lot of tight cover, lay downs and things like that, where you want to, really make a precise cast and get that bait going right down the trunk. So, but all of these blanks have that same material in them. I'm going to match them up again with a couple of different sizes of line. I use a lot of 10 and 12 pound fluorocarbon. If you're trying to get that bait to its maximum depth, have it, the most lively action, especially on some of these smaller baits. Small profile baits definitely catch a lot of fish in the wintertime. A lighter line really helps with that. But in a lot of cases, if you're fishing at Sam Rayburn or, Gunnersville and there's a lot of eelgrass or hydrilla or milfoil, and you're ripping a red-eye shad through it, having a little bit heavier line is a benefit. If you're throwing that hybrid hunter or red-eye shad, having a little heavier line makes it fall a little slower. You can, work it through. It gives you a little better sensitivity. You can rip that bait, clean it out of the grass a little bit better. So I typically have rods set up with 10 and 12, maybe 14, again, depending on the cover and the size of fish. And then I'll definitely have multiple rods rigged with 17 pound for that same reason. I always like to use a more power gear ratio reel. So, gear ratios are something that I think are very misunderstood by a lot of people. They think gear ratio means the speed of the reel. And in a sense it does, but it's the gear ratio meshed with the spool size that really gives you the whole story. And what I'm looking for is inches per turn. So to me, the perfect cranking combo is 25 inches per turn, especially this time of year. You do not want to fish that bait faster than you should. I can always, speed up with this particular reel. So this has a 6:2 gear ratio. It's my KVD signature series, 25 inches per turn. And again, when I'm fishing most of my crankbaits, I like a 6.5 or the 7 foot, the CC1, the CC2, or my signature series rod. And, if I'm casting for accuracy at all, or I'm fishing channel swing banks, where I'm really focused on paralleling the shoreline and making a precise presentation to a particular zone, I don't need anything more than that 7 foot rod. Now, when you go to a place, like a Hartwell or a Table Rock, and you start getting off of some of these deeper banks and you're starting to throw some deeper baits and things like that, and you want to throw a small bait real far, that's when I go up to like a CC4. So this is a medium heavy action. It's got a real soft tip, still a composite rod. I may go up to a BB1 Pro. This is a fantastic reel here. It comes in a 6:2 gear ratio, same 25 inches per turn. It's got a big power handle on it. I love this for my summer cranking, for series 5s, 5XDs, 6XDs as well. It just is a really, really comfortable, a little bit bigger reel, that really handles that real well as well. If you like a faster ratio, that's fine, but I'm just telling you, I think a 6.2 to 1 is what you really want, especially in this cold water period. And this little bit longer rod like this, I can throw this 1.5 flat, or one of my favorite early spring baits is this Strike King 3XD. It's a small profile bait. It really dives deep. This will dive 12 feet deep, and it throws like a dream on this because it has a real soft tip. And that's what you'll learn if you've never used a composite rod before, is that these rods really help you for, being able to not use a ton of effort and really launch a bait, super far. The way they load and unload just makes it a lot easier. It's almost like a golf swing, in that you can just use your whole body and kind of lob this out there, and you can throw a crankbait a really long ways. When I'm cranking in the summer, with a 5XD or a 6XD, I mean, it looks like I'm really slinging it, but it's just a big lob, and you can sling a bait 50 or 60 yards with it just because of the way these composite rods load and unload. So that's the basic, that's the rod reel line setup, composite rods. I'm throwing a lot of smaller profile baits, so that's why I like these particular rods in my series. For these, if you're fishing someplace where you're going to be cranking a 6XD, you're down at Amistad or something like that, I'm going to use the same stuff that I'm going to use in the summer, but I do like the same gear ratio, that 25 inch per turn reel, just to get that bait down there and not overfish it. You don't want to overspeed it. Other times of the year when the water's warm, speed is real critical as a trigger. This time of year, you want to change speeds, but I don't want to overfish it, and a 6.2 to 1 ratio really helps me do that. So I've got my setup, and now it's really focusing on the bait. So you want to, use each lure as a tool that's going to be the most efficient for the situation that you're fishing in. So if you're fishing a lake that has grass, no doubt, especially these flatter lakes, a place like Gunnersville, the lakes up and down Chickamauga, places on the Tennessee River where you got milfoil or hydrilla or eelgrass, you want to have a bait that you can fish efficiently in that zone with it. And this is the same in Florida, for my red eye shads and things like that. I like a 7 foot, just, regular medium action. If you're really, really in heavy grass, you may go to the CC3, which is a medium heavy. It's a little bit stiffer rod. It's a little bit beefier if you're going to fish around a lot of grass. Just helps you rip that bait free. It's also a great bladed jig rod for like throwing thunder crickets and stuff as well. It's a 7 foot 1 inch rod, so it's very similar. It's got a lot of backbone, but it's still got that soft tip. And again, a lipless bait is so good on these flatter lakes when you're covering these grass flats and things like that. My 2 favorite baits for sure for cranking cold water and grass is a red eye shad and the new Hybrid Hunter. So the Hybrid Hunter comes in 2 different sizes. My favorite size for sure is the smaller one. So often when it's cold, when you're throwing these baits, you're just trying to generate bites. If I'm going down to Texas, I'm at Choke Canyon or something like that, or, one of these Rayburn, and I'm fishing some of the areas that still have grass in it, and I'm looking for a big fish, that big bait right there has a lot of wobble. A Hybrid Hunter is very similar to a red eye shad in that it's got a flat side, it's got a really loud rattle to it, but that L bill that it has just really allows it to fish really clean through the grass. So it does float. You can reel it down to the grass. And the way that I like to fish it when it's cold is I almost kind of worm it through. So I make a cast out there and I'm reeling along and I just kind of pull and stop, kind of pull and stop, reel it down into the grass, kind of let it flow back out, and just kind of a start and stop motion with it. The same with a red eye shad. So many people think that, lipless bait is just kind of a dummy bait. You just cast it out and reel it in. Well, in cold water this time of the year, it is definitely not. You need to allow this bait to fall. You want it to get down, in the grass if you can. And it's very good in places that don't have grass, for gravel bars and, shallow rock flats and things like that as well. I want it to be contact in the bottom because it sinks. I can cast it out there and let it hit the bottom. So often I like to fish this on heavy line just to help me control the fall of that bait. So I'll put it on 17-pound fluoro, and whether I'm throwing a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce or even a 1/4 ounce, depending on the depth I'm in, I just want that bait to flutter down. What's unique about a red-eye shad is that when this bait sinks, it stays horizontal and it shimmies to the bottom. You can, if you just drop this over the side of the boat at a clear water lake and just watch it, or watch it in your swimming pool, just drop it and let it fall. It just shimmies or it flutters back to the bottom. And that's when they really bite it. So what I want to do is cast it out there. I'll count it down. If I'm fishing a 10-foot flat, I'll let it sink all the way to the bottom and just give it a little pull and then let it sink back to the bottom, almost fishing it like a jig, or, you know, really kind of yo-yoing it. The difference between this and a jig is when I let a jig fall, I like to let it fall on a slack line. When I let this red-eye shad fall, I want to let it fall on a semi-slack line. So I want to be able to tell if one bites it. So I'm going to pull it and then just kind of follow it back down when it's falling. I don't have really, you know, too much tension on the line. I don't want to kill that action, but you know, I don't want it to fall dead slack, so I wouldn't feel it if a bass inhaled it, because 99.9% of the bites that you get this time of year or in real cold conditions are going to be when that bait is falling. So that's the way I like to fish it. You know, if you can get it ticking the bottom, pull it, let it sink, let it hit the bottom, you can pull it up again. And again, with this composite rod, you just have really, really good feel for it. So when I'm around grass, you know, first and foremost, that's gonna be my go-to. Now, as the water warms up a little bit and you're fishing grass, don't be scared to throw some of your regular crankbaits. You know, I love to crank grass. A KVD 1.5 is a great bait. You know, if you want to fish that 4 to 6 foot zone, this is a perfect bait for that depth. If you get a little bit deeper, the 1.5 flat deep is, you know, that's an 8 or 9 foot bait. So you can use other crankbaits around grass as well. But that's really what these baits are designed for. So each has a little bit different action. I like flat-sided baits in the winter. You know, bass definitely use their lateral line in a lot of situations to feed in the winter in cold water. So even if it's chocolate mud, just really, really dirty, you know, don't think that, you know, just because they can't see a bait, they can't feel it. So that's where, you know, a flat side on that hybrid hunter or a red-eye shad or that 1.5 flat deep really come into play. I mean, real bait fish, you know, they give off that sonic image as they move through the water. And that's what a crankbait does too, is they're feeling it before they actually see it. And, you know, you want to have a bait that gives off a lot of pressure waves in it. That's why, you know, the homemade wood baits got real popular for a while. And that's kind of the next bait that we're going to talk about is the new chick magnet from Strike King. So this is a totally flat side. It's got a circuit board bill. It's got a really nice little rattle to it. And it has a pretty good thumping action to it. So a lot of cold water baits, you know, have a real tight action. And there's no doubt that, you know, those tight vibrations really make a difference in a lot of situations. This has a little wider wobble to it. It's got a little more thump. And I like it when the conditions get stained. You know, I mean, if you get a little dirty water, that's where the chick magnet really shines. I mean, it really gives off an incredible sonic image and good pressure waves and sound in the water. It comes in a lot of different colors. So we'll talk about color here more in a minute, but this is a really good bait. It's not a deep running bait. It's basically a bait that you can run anywhere from 2 foot to probably down to about 6 foot, just depending on the size of the line you use. If you're using heavy line, if you're trying to fish shallower and it's dirty, you know, that's where you throw it on 17 pound, and this bait will work really well in both situations. But in those coldest conditions, when you're trying to get it to its maximum depth, you know, you go down to 10-pound line, it just really livens up the action of those baits. So it's a tremendous bait for that time of year, and it's brand new to the market, and it's a great addition. It fishes a lot like a square bill. I mean, if you look at them both right here, they're very similar in size and profile. It does have a flatter side to it. It's got that round bill, so it definitely fishes exceptionally well around rocks and gravel. And Andy Morgan designed it. You know, I mean, he's from Lake Chickamauga. He grew up fishing the Tennessee River, and in that area, that's you know, what it's known for is this time of the year using, you know, these more natural presentation, these tighter wobbling wood crankbaits. A lot of homemade baits came from that East Tennessee area. And this is a plastic bait that's very durable. It's much tougher than any of the wood baits, and it has the same type of action. You know, technology has allowed us to really design a lot better lures that are a lot more durable now than we ever used to be able to do. So with you know, different densities of plastic in that, you can really recreate the same type of action that you never could before that a wood bait had. So the chick magnet is definitely one for cold water, shallow water fishing that you have to have in your box. My two favorite deeper baits, and I fish a lot of places that have clear water, and the clearer the water, the deeper the bass are going to be, just plain and simple. I mean, if the light penetrates down 6 feet in the water, those fish are going to be kind of just beyond that light penetration zone. So they're going to be, you know, in that 8 to 10 foot zone. So you need a bait that gets to that next level. So one of my favorites, and this is a bait that I designed for Strike King, is the 1.5 flat. So it's got a round bill, longer bill to it, flat sides to it. It's kind of a taper. And it is a fantastic bait when the water's real cold. It's got a tight action. It's very, very lively. I mean, I have just had some unbelievable days from north to south. This is the first bait that I like to throw at Lake St. Clair in the spring right after ice out. And, you know, it's a fantastic bait in a place like Table Rock, you know, down in the Ozarks region. Wide wobbling crankbaits like a wigglewort have, you know, they've got a legendary status down there. There's a lot of crayfish, and just having a crankbait that really kicks around those rocks is something that is very good. I mean, there's a lot of fish caught on them, but in the same situation, I like the action of this type of bait too. The most important thing is making sure that for the depth zone that you're fishing, that your bait's hitting the bottom. So when I'm in those type of situations, I've got my boat, you know, positioned right in the depth zone that I want to fish. I'm paralleling the bank. You know, when you're cold water cranking, it's all about keeping that bait in the strike zone for the maximum amount of time. And, you know, when you're doing that, your lure's in the strike zone the whole cast. So that's what I'm really trying to do. So at a place like Table Rock or Grand Lake, I'm paralleling the bank, throwing right down to the zone with the bait that runs the depth that I think the fish are in. So starting out, you never know. I mean, if they're up in 2 foot, you need to have a bait that's efficient for that particular depth zone. You know, I want a bait that's going to basically run to the depth that I'm trying to target, because if I use a bait that runs 10 foot deep and throw it up in 2 foot of water, it's really overpowering that bottom, and I'm killing a lot of that action. So if I'm fishing 5 feet, I want a bait that runs 5.5 foot deep. So I'm going to use my line, rod, reel, line, rod positioning, and lure choice just to get that bait to that particular zone, so that bait has its maximum action. So again, a lot of these places where you want to get it deeper, that's where I'm going to use that 1.5 flat, or even like this 3XD. I love this bait for this time of year because it's got a small, real small profile, and it runs really deep. This is a legit, easy to get to 12 foot depth with this particular. I mean, this little bait will get 12 feet deep. You put it on 10-pound fluorocarbon and, you know, put it on a cranking setup like this. You can make a real long cast with it. I can easily hit the bottom in 12 foot. And it just is it's a game changer to be able to have a small profile bait like that when the conditions are tough. And it really imitates the forage real well. They're just not going to pass it up. So, you know, I'm not afraid to throw deeper diving baits if I have to, you know, especially if you get into some of the real clear lakes. You know, several times when we've had the classic at Lake Hartwell in the spring, when it's real cold, I thought that it would be just, you know, a tournament that I could win real easy with a 5XD and a 6XD. You know, those both have a tight action. They're baits that you would think of more as a summertime bait, but being able to get a bait down to the bottom in that 15 to 20 or 25 foot zone where the bass are living is critical. And they just hadn't seen one there before. So unfortunately, both times when we had those events, it warmed up, and those fish moved up to the bank and started to spawn instead of staying out there where they were in that crankbait zone. But, you know, a crankbait is just so efficient for particular depth zones, and that's why I like to choose them. So now we get into really thinking about colors. Most important thing that I look at is the water clarity first and foremost. So the dirtier the water, the more visible I want to make that bait. And, you know, I'm really thinking also about the forage base there. So in Texas, for sure, all the lakes down there, Louisiana, they have a ton of crawfish in them. And those crawfish get real red, and they get real dark red if it's a clear water lake. So, I mean, that Delta red is one of my favorite colors right there. I mean, here's a red-eye shad in it. This is the 2-tap model, which I really love, the tungsten 2-tap for cold water. I think the tungsten is a little heavier than lead, and its bait just fishes a little bit deeper. But that darker red, as opposed to a fire crawl, which is a brighter orange, this is going to be more natural in a clear, situation, where this is going to be more visible in a dirtier situation. So if the water's clear, I like natural colors. A brown craw is one of my favorites. I won a tournament at Grand Lake with this particular bait because that water had that clarity, and the bottom color is this dark brown. So I'm really looking for more natural crawfish patterns in clear water if I'm trying to do that, or more natural shad patterns like this green gizzard shad if the water's clear. And then in dirty water, I want things that are more visible. I may go to a chick magnet like this. The water's dirty. That bright chartreuse is just going to be really, really hard to beat. Or Chartreuse Perch. This is one of my favorite early spring Kentucky lake colors, because that water there typically gets dirty. Again, they draw that lake down to winter pool, gets a lot of color in it through the spring. And you need something that's visible and yet natural, because in Kentucky Lake, they still really, really focus. There's so many shad in the Tennessee River. They still focus on shad. So, I know that there's just so much been done with red crankbaits and like the Delta Craw or the Fire Craw the last few years. And red is a great color. It's a great springtime color, especially if that water has some color in it and you're fishing a place that has a lot of crayfish. But don't overlook the shad patterns, your chromes, golds. My favorite red-eye shad is still a chrome sexy shad or a gold sexy shad, as long as I have a little bit of clarity to it. And, you really want to match the particular forage where you're at in choosing those colors. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot of different choices, but the number one things to remember in cold water cranking is location. Get your boat positioned where you can keep that bait in the strike zone, and pick the lure in combination with your line that's getting down to the zone that you're trying to cover. If you're looking and seeing that there's a really good drop, or there's a lot of rocks at 8 feet, you need a bait that's covering that 8-foot zone. If it's 6 foot, it's that zone. If it's 10, it's 10. But you really want to make sure that you're covering that particular zone. And again, you put that trolling motor down, keep covering water, keep moving, and eventually you're going to hit them. I want that bait hitting the bottom. I do a lot of start and stop. I'll really adjust some of these floating baits. You can put some suspend dots and make them kind of run a little bit deeper. The one thing that I do on mine is I really like to change them out to the Mustad. The model is a TG76. It's a hook that I designed for Mustad. It allows me to put an extra short shank. So this is a chick magnet. I've got two number 2 KVD 76s. I've got some here. I think in the drawer. They make a lot of different sizes of them. But these hooks for me, especially this time of the year, are absolutely critical on the crankbaits. So you can usually go a size bigger because the shank is so short with them. And I'm going to put much bigger hooks. I've got number ones on this big hybrid hunter right here, and they just really lock and hold the fish on. And again, having this little larger hook, it's got a little extra heavier wire diameter, but it's an ultra point, super sharp, and it does help the action on a lot of these baits too. Having these little heavier hooks on the square bill, it makes them a little erratic, and that's not a bad thing. You want that bait to not run always perfectly true. It should hunt a little bit, and that's what is so special about that KVD 1.5. When you put those number 2s on there, this thing just really hunts with those bigger hooks on there, and makes a difference in the action of that lure and the way that it runs. And not only that, but once you get one locked on those right there, they just hardly come off. I've caught so many of them that have swiped at it and catch them in the gill or in the top of the fin or something like that, and be able to land them because these hooks just have such great holding power. So I put them on all of my crankbaits. I put them on my jerk baits, just about everything anymore, just because they have tremendous holding power and they're so strong. So it's a critical part of my cranking process. So that is kind of my cranking system. I have a box set up, with all these baits. I've got here's an edge box with chick magnets. There's two colors that I'm still missing that are back ordered, you know, just like the rest of the world right now. Supply chain, you know, it's been tough, but you know, I've got a box of Series 3s, you know, with all the different colors in them. I've got KVD 1.5 flats, and I like these, you know, for these small crankbaits like this, these 3700 series work really well. Here's my 1.5 box. I've got a hybrid hunter. This is an Edge Flex box, a little bit bigger, deeper box. So I got all my hybrid hunters in there. I've got one right here with KVD hard knock. So that's something that's pretty critical, and that I really didn't focus on yet, is talking about sound. In that I like to have baits that are silent, and then I like to have baits that have rattles. And no doubt having the 1.5 with the new hard knock, I mean, this new knocker, that is one of my favorite cold water baits. This is a new fire crawl, and again, it's got just that one knocker sound in it. It's got a little tungsten ball in there, and it really makes a ton of extra noise. It's very different than a standard 1.5 that has no sound. Now, all baits make noise because they have the hooks banging against the side of it. It's going to, you know, it's going to make some noise, and they're making a lot of vibration. But having different rattles can really be a game changer. So just like this Red Eye Shad, that's the 2-tap, the tungsten 2-tap. It's got that more knocking sound. It's a little heavier. And then a standard Red Eye Shad, you know, it's got all those BBs in there. And no doubt that, you know, these have caught just literally millions and millions of fish with that extra loud sound. I mean, they just give off a tremendous amount of vibration and noise. And that's what they really focus on in cold water. So I've got a good mix of all those. I've got all, you know, all these ready to go, a 3XD box. So it just keeps me organized, and, you know, I have the colors that I need. I've got the basic colors for your shad patterns, for your bluegill, crawfish, and then, you know, more natural for crystal clear water and brighter colors for dirtier water. You don't have to have 27 colors of each one for sure, but you do have to have a good basic, you know, mix for them. So another thing we wanted to do in this is be able to answer some questions and stuff too. So you can start firing some questions off. I got something else that's new to the market. It's actually in stores now, but this is something that I was real adamant about. I told you how important these KVD mustads are to me on a lot of my baits, and I learned the hard way, catching a lot of big smallmouths on my jerk baits and things like that they're just a game changer there. So I worked with Strike King and Mustad to come out with this new series of KVD Elite jerk baits, and they come standard right in the package with those Mustad number 4 KVDs on them, and they're real special colors. So there's 6 that are available exclusively at Bass Pro Shops. And these have just really awesome finishes to them. There's some real natural colors and some real, you know, forage specific colors. And then the other ones, you can actually get, the other 6 are available. My brother has them at DNR Sports. So this is something brand new that that I worked on this past year. I wanted to create some, definitely, I've got some good smallmouth colors in there for sure, some good clear water colors, but I also have, you know, some real great, you know, largemouth colors. This is a new version of the Sexy Shad. This is Sexy Shad 2.0, and it just came out really, really pretty.
Focus on it. There we go.
So,
Perfect.
Nick is running the camera tonight. So Nicholas is he's kind of he does a lot of extra work for me on the side and filming and things like that. It helps me a lot with our social media, kind of keeping me in tune. But, you know, we've been working, again, getting prepared for the season. You know, I've posted a few pictures and a few videos lately. We've got quite a bit of stuff that we've got in the hopper. I know that electronics are a big hot topic. And again, remember that starting next Monday on January 31st, we are going to start King of Bass Live. And we will talk about everything bass fishing on that. We're going to cover a lot of different topics and things, but electronics are definitely a real hot topic right now. For sure, on tour, you have to have the very best. You know, I run all Humminbird and Johnson Outdoors Minn Kota products for the One Boat Network. I've got my boat set up here. I've got Mega Live. I've got Mega 360. You know, I've got Mega side imaging on the back. I've got mega down imaging, on my Ultrex on the front as well. And, you match that with Lake Master mapping and a set of Raptors on the back of your boat, and it just kind of gives you the ultimate in boat control. I posted a picture the other day of the front of my boat, and you got a lot of comments from people saying, man, it's overkill. It's more than you really need. But I can tell you this, is that when you're competing against the best guys in the world, and everybody has the best electronics, there's every manufacturer now has some kind of forward-facing sonar. And, we're really the only one that has a true Mega 360, and it is a game changer. And I know they've been hard to find. I had a lot of questions about that, but I checked with the factory. If you're looking for a Mega 360 or a Mega Live, I can tell you they are building them every day and shipping them. They're building a lot of them. Just like everything else, the supply chain has hurt in a few cases where there's a component or two missing here or there. But again, right now at Humminbird, the plant's running wide open. They're building, helix units, solix units. There's a lot of ice fishing stuff out there that you can get Mega Live for ice fishing, but they are building Mega 360s and Mega Lives as fast as they can. They're going to the stores every day. I was actually at the Cabela's in Grand Rapids, and they had 2 Mega 360s there in stock. I saw at my brother's shop today, they just got a shipment of Mega 360s in as well. Seen a lot of new boats going out with them. So, again, when you make your living with it, it's so important to have the very best. And that's why I have, a boat outfitted the way that I do with that much in electronics. If you're just a weekend fisherman, you don't have to have it, but I will never apologize for helping somebody try to become a better angler, whether I'm doing a seminar on cranking like this or talking about electronics or looking about upgrading their electronics. There's a lot of benefit to having that technology. It doesn't mean they're going to bite, but boy, it sure helps. When we go to these huge bodies of water, to be able to break down a lake a lot quicker. If you go to Toledo Bend and it's 150,000 acres, having a Lake Master map that shows all of the depth contours and the river channels and the creek channels and things like that, it helps you narrow down so that you're, really focusing on the areas that fit the seasonal pattern. Then you can go into that area and I can see the cover and the structure around me. And that's where these tools, and especially forward-facing sonar, has really changed the game, because it allows you to see out in front of the boat. In the past, we'd have to drive over the top of structure with just a 20-degree cone, which is just a matter of a few feet, and go back and forth to try to figure out where the end of a point was, or if there's any stumps on it or anything like that. When we got side imaging, it allowed us to be that much more efficient. So you could look at a couple of 100 feet or 75 feet each way and see in detail a good picture of the bottom. Now with Mega 360, as I'm going down the bank, I can see everything that's around the boat, and I'm seeing so much stuff that I never thought I would before, never knew that was there. You're going down a line of docks and all of a sudden you see a brush pile over here to your left. You make the cast over there and you can catch them. Or if I point the trolling motor over there, I can use my Mega Live and actually see if there's any fish in it. I can't know for sure if they're bass or crappie or gar or other things like that. But in a lot of cases, you can really tell by how they set up, and they're making constant improvements to that technology too. So I know there's some more updates coming on the Mega Live, for it. So I got mine last year, and it's really opened my eyes to just how many fish are out there that see my stuff, but don't actually bite her, that I'm not good enough to make them react. You think that if you went through an area with a jerk bait and that there's one there, that I'm going to catch those fish that are there. Well, that's not the case. So often they'll just follow it, or they just turn their nose away from it. But it does show you that they're there, and it really helps. So technology is definitely a game changer, and it's here to stay. So we're going to start the season off down in Louisiana at a shallow lake down there full of cypress trees. But as we go into some of these other lakes, we go to Lake Fork next, and it's going to be an early pre-spawn bite. I'm pretty confident that being out there offshore and in those trees, having a Mega 360 and a Mega Live is really going to help us narrow that search down to find some of those fish that are out there. So, Nick, you got some questions there yet?
And here's one about Mega Live and 360.
Okay.
If you could only have one, which one?
So I love Mega 360. you know, when I first saw it, and I worked with the engineers at Humminbird in the very beginning with the first 360. So originally it was designed to be mounted on the transom of a boat. And when I saw it the very first time, I said, guys, you got to have this on the trolling motor. You got to have it on the front of the boat. And it wasn't long after that we did. And the first 360s were good. You could see big objects, standing timber or a big brush pile. But now with the Mega 360, it's basically the same detail as side imaging or mega side imaging on the front of the boat. So you don't have to drive over an object or a brush pile. You can actually see it. And when you have your weapon in your hand and make a cast to it. And that's what I love about a Mega 360 is it shows me a lot of structure, depth changes, weed edges, schools of bait, pods of fish, bass, what, you know, you see everything with it before you get there. Now, what Live does is it allows you to, once you see something like that on your Mega 360, is to point that live transducer, you point the trolling motor right to that zone, and you can see the distance and the depth, and you can see in real time your bait, and you can see how the fish are reacting to it. You know, if they're following your jerk bait, or if they don't even look at it, to know what presentation to use. So I think the Mega 360 is definitely an unbelievable tool, because structure is still, you know, to me, the most important thing. Seeing the structure and the cover, but the two together are absolutely incredible. And, you know, I've seen that some of the competitors out there have just tried to come out with some kind of 360 version too, but it's not the same. The beauty of the Humminbird Mega 360 is it's a separate pod that mounts on the trolling motor bracket, and it's forward of your trolling motor shaft, and it's working all the time. You don't have to stop moving your trolling motor. You know, you don't have to point your trolling motor a certain way. It's working all the time. It's constantly scanning. I've got a dedicated unit just for that 360 on the front of my boat. I have 3 Helix 12s on the bow of my Z21 XL, and I have that for a reason, because that Mega 360 and the Mega Live are so critical to my success on tour that I have to have a dedicated unit for both of them. And my third unit, I run the Lake Master map and down imaging on that. So I'm looking, you know, I can see everything from down. I see the mapping contour of the area that I'm in, and I can see a 360 picture all around the boat. And then I see the live, you know, the Mega Live as well. So it's just, you think the fish don't have a chance, but you still got to make them bite. You still got to come up with the right presentation, but it definitely has really helped us be more efficient when we're, you know, trying to cover some of these areas and see a lot of, see a lot of different water in a particular day's time. So that's the beauty of electronics is, you know, whether you're a tournament fisherman or a weekend fisherman, you have a limited amount of time and you want to catch as many fish, you want to get yourself in a good area and be fishing in a high productive zone. And that's what quality electronics like Humminbird will really do for you.
Next question. Immediately after ice out in Michigan, aside from a ridge trimmer, what crankbait / color is best for ultra clear water?
So one thing that happens on the north zone when you have lakes that freeze over is, you know, you think that the water is super, super cold. We catch them through the ice. They're fairly active, but as soon as the ice comes off, that lake makes a big jump in water temperature. I mean, it's just like having a drink out there in the hot sun with ice cubes in it. As soon as that last ice cube's gone, boy, it starts to get warm quickly. And areas that radiate heat or get more direct sunshine are going to be the high percentage zones where the bass go. So you want to fish the northerly facing banks. The fish actually start to move shallow or shallower in whatever system they're in. And they like to get around objects that hold heat. So it could be rocks, dead vegetation, could be last year's oak leaves, it's lily pad roots, dead reeds, anything dark bottom, they're gonna get around to. So almost immediately you can, you know, catch them with crankbait. So in some of the lakes that don't have a lot of that and the fish hang out deeper, you know, I'm going to use a suspending jerkbait. But in a lot of our shallower, weedier lakes, that's where a red-eye shad is a go-to. Another one is going to be the hybrid hunter. That's going to be a dynamite bait for a lot of these shallower, weedy bays and some of these northern lakes like we have up here in Michigan, where those fish are going to get shallow. And you want to use colors that are natural. So almost without fail, for me, it's the crawfish or the, the bluegill type patterns. I use a lot of bluegill colored square bills, red eye shads. This baby carp color is one of my favorite colors in a red eye early in the spring. So those more natural colors, because our water tends to be pretty clear in these natural lakes. This phantom green crawfish, that's a great color for it. Brown crawfish. Those crawfish and brim patterns are for sure where it's at early spring.
I just had one, and I was looking for more. When searching for bass in cold water, do you look for bait or do you start at structures, laydowns, etc.?
When I'm looking for everything. So the biggest thing in cold water is you do need to be around where the forage is at for sure. And you just never know. I mean, I don't know if they're focused on crawfish or shad, and bass are opportunistic. I mean, they're going to be focused on whatever is the most available food source in that particular area. So, in some of our northern lakes, that means perch. In a lot of places in the south, it's going to be crawfish, just depending on the bottom concentrate or what the lake up or the makeup of the lake is. So one thing that I think a lot of people might not understand is that vegetation is a huge producer of crawfish. So, these hydrilla mats, milfoil, crawfish live in grass. They love grass, gives them a great place to hide, just like rocks do. So there's a lot of crawfish in the grass. And I think that's why you see, these red crawfish colors work so well down there in Texas, because there's so many crawfish that live in those grass beds as well. But, a place like Table Rock, that the whole bottom, I mean, there's not a place in there that's not hard bottom and not rocky. There's crawfish everywhere. But if for some reason there's a big pot of shad moving into that particular bay, or, you get one of these fronts that come through and it drops a rain, and especially a warm rain, and water's running in the back of a creek, I mean, shad will run to that warmer water as well, and the bass will follow them. So, you just got to be focused on what's there. That's where electronics really come in handy. In this period, I'm really looking as I go into different areas for the presence of bait fish on the graph, just seeing them in the water column. If I'm running back to a creek to check some couple of channel swings or a bluff end, I'll stop short and just idle up to it with my side imaging and with my 2D sonar on, and I'm just looking to see, is there shad out in the center of the creek? Is there anything along the bank that I'm at? The wind will push plankton to an area, and it still will get the bait fish moving shallow as well too in time. So, wind direction is key. Always that sun direction, it's, if you get a south, facing bank, these northerly banks get that the sun's in the southern sky, and, it's going to warm those up quicker, and bluegills will move up there, sun, everything will. So it's just real important to look at the overall layout when you're fishing this time of year. And again, I don't want to say that water temperature isn't important, because it is in general. And if you can find one area of the lake that's 6 or 7, 8 degrees warmer than another area, those fish are definitely going to be more active. But I don't let a specific number bother me about water temperature. It doesn't bother me if the water's 42 degrees or if it's 47 degrees. I'm looking for differences as I move around the lake, find an area where it's a little bit warmer, or, other times of year, you're looking for maybe where it's a little cooler, but I'm paying attention to it. I've always got it up, but I don't let it get in my head and think that, just because it's cold, they're not going to bite.
Does transducer echo negatively impact bites?
I have never seen it with bass. Now, you can, say what you want, but growing up in Michigan and fishing for bass in a lot of clear water, they definitely are aware if you're making noise. You can see that if you move in a boat real quickly or anything like that. But they're pretty curious. You go down the bank and you start and stop with your trolling motor. I mean, gizzard shad and carp and other species, they spook, but bass, they're not scared of a lot of that stuff. So do they hear it? In a lot of cases, they hear lots of different noises, but does it negatively affect them? Sometimes I've seen it draw them to me. So, I'm not one of those guys that says, well, hey, just because I'm fishing shallow, I'm going to turn my depth finder off. I just, it's too important of a tool that Mega 360 has showed me so many things that, isolated stumps and 2 foot of water in the back of a creek or a brush pile, or, I just don't turn my electronics off.
What do you recommend to use on an Alabama lake without a ton of grass?
So in Alabama, there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of red clay there. But, in the spring there, you're really trying to focus on rocks or current, where current will actually help the bass feed. They'll position on points and things like that where they can ambush pods of shad as they move over them. So understanding the power generation schedule, if you're on a bigger lake or on like a TVA lake especially, is really critical to know when they're moving water or they're not, because it definitely activates the fish. If it's, the Coosa River, it's absolutely critical. Places like that, the different current flow. If you're fishing a pond or something like that, that absolutely has no current, it's not as important. But bass are basically going to be on whatever structure their forage is in that particular system, and they like to have access to deep water and when it gets real cold, for sure. But I've caught lots of bass real shallow all over through the Mid-South, all winter long, especially if the water clarity is stained enough to keep them up there, or if there's grass, vegetation, brush, cover, standing timber, things like that, to keep them in that zone. They're going to be where the food's at.
Shortly after ice out, do you reach for horizontal or vertical lure presentations?
Shortly after ice out, it's pretty much horizontal for me. I don't fish vertical early spring. I mean, here in Michigan, the bass, they tend to move shallow quickly. I mean, that's where the warmer water happens almost the day after. If it's a real deep, clear body of water, they'll still be deep, but I really don't like to get over the top of them this time of year. I like to cast to them. No doubt, right at ice out, one of my favorite baits is definitely a small, like a 325 rage swimmer, just on a jig head or a scruffing head. We use a kind of a little special one we're working on for Strike King right now that we use a lot up here in the north. And then other than that too, once you find an area that's got a lot of fish in it, a tube is especially a downsized tube. The Fat Baby coffee tube, the 275 is a really good one. And a Ned rig. A Ned rig is a deadly bait early spring once you found the fish. But to cover water originally, I'm going to start with that rage swimmer down on the bottom. And then shortly thereafter, once that water starts to warm a little bit, or if I got a lot of shallow cover, I'm going to be throwing a suspending jerk bait or, red eye shad, or, start a thunder cricket. Once the spring progresses pretty quickly, as long as, you still get some, positive warming trends and things like that. Typically though, once the ice comes off, we're going to get a series of fronts, and, it may set them back. They'll get warm a little bit, get some sunshine, those fish will move up, you can catch them, they'll get pretty active, and then we'll get a cold front and they'll back off. So depending on the weather conditions, and that's something that, this time of year, you got to really focus on. On my phone, all these tournaments that I've got coming up, we're going to be in Monroe, Louisiana. I've been watching the weather trends there for the last 3 weeks just to see, and it's gotten cold down there. It's gotten real cold. So it's real important to kind of understand what the weather's doing and then what it's supposed to do. So I try to kind of think ahead, especially for these tournaments that are a week long. You kind of got to plan for the future a little bit. And it's no different if you're a weekend angler, as you're looking at the work week and you're saying, well, hey, I'm going to get a chance to go out this Saturday and fish. Watch those weather pattern trends as you get up to that time, because it'll really give you a clue as to, where the fish might be located and what their activity level might be.
I'm a co-angler in Central Arkansas. What's your best advice for heavy pressure lakes? When you got a ton of pressure, it's one of those things that you really got to be good at finesse techniques. Now having, multiple, Ned rigs, wacky rigs, a Nico rig is deadly. The great thing about a Nico rig is it's a super awesome finesse presentation that, depending on the size of the nail weight that you use or the Nico weight that you use, you can fish deep or shallow, and it catches them. So you really got to look at the pro in the boat, or the guy in the front, what he's fishing, how thoroughly he's covering it, the habit, what the terrain is. If you're fishing a big grass flat, and he's catching them with a topwater, you might be able to throw the same thing behind him. But, if he's fishing specific, the outside corners of a docks or something like that, you got to fish everything in between. So, a Carolina rig, finesse baits, Carolina rig, or, like a wobble head, that's a great way to cover a lot of water in between, just trying to fish, find, a rocky spot or things like that around. But you got to try to do different things than the guy in the front, and definitely finesse is something, you're going to have more spinning rods probably than bait casters in a lot of situations in your hands.
How's the fishing and fishing conditions on Gun Lake in Michigan? You used to fish that lake a lot back in the day, and you used to see you on it a lot back in the years 84 and 93.
Yeah, I've always loved Gun Lake. It's a shallow, clear, flat lake that has not a lot of grass. It's got some grass clumps, and it's a great power fishing lake. I mean, it's phenomenal for a lot of these shallow crankbaits. A square bill of KVD 1.5 and a red eye shad are baits that you can cover a ton of those flats. These bass roam them almost like sharks. They're hunting for bluegill there. That's the primary forage in Gun Lake. There's some skipjack minnows and things like that as well. But, I do a lot of power fishing there, and I love topwater there. It's just because it's clear. The depth zone is where a lot of it is, 6-7 foot or less. And those fish are in the zone where they can see your topwater on every cast, or they can see a square bill on every cast. And it's just a matter of covering a lot of water. It's almost like it's like a big flat desert out there. And you just got to put the trolling motor down, fish the conditions, fish where the wind's at, look for those isolated, use your polarized glasses and really look for those isolated weed clumps. And, if you get into an area where you catch some, with some power baits, you can definitely slow down and throw a tube or a Ned rig or, a wacky rig around some of those clumps and things like that. But it's one I like to cover water. And the other thing on there is there's a ton, there's thousands of docks. It's a great dock lake as well.
On the Cal Sag in April, what would you do?
The Cal Sag in April? Well, a lot of it just depends on what the Mother Nature throws at you for, for weather conditions. April can be actually, sometimes the fish spawning, starting to, or we can have a real cold snap. So, you really got to just look at that water clarity and the current conditions to kind of figure that out. But typically that's usually a pretty good time to start.
In the springtime, what conditions would you have or would you want to throw a Thunder Cricket?
So I love to throw bladed jigs like the Thunder Cricket. They love vibration. We talked about that in cold water. It's a great cold water bait. In real extreme conditions, I don't have a lot of success with it. But once that water temperature starts to warm up, if it gets into the upper 40s and definitely through that whole 50-degree range, that's when a bladed jig really comes into its own. It's good around the pre-spawn. I love to throw them around docks and grass, rocks if I can. It just catches big fish. It displaces so much water that big fish react to it well. I look at the clarity and try to imitate the forage that, it most likely duplicates. If the water's a little clear, I typically throw a green pumpkin or a bluegill pattern because that's what the fish are focused on, is either crawfish or bluegill. If it's dirtier, I like black and blue or black and red or white and chartreuse, brighter colors. A lot of times early in the spring, as it starts to warm, you'll get shad moving up. If there's some dead vegetation, some old, lily pad stems or water willow stems, grass like that, a bladed jig is deadly around that. The back corners of docks, shallow docks and things like that. And that's the awesome thing about a Thunder Cricket, is that it skips so good that you can fish it around a lot of those places. So it's a dynamite bait. It's something you definitely got to have tied on. I'm headed to Louisiana, and it's a lot of shallow cypress trees and wood and things like that. And that's going to be a bait that will definitely be a factor in this first Bass Pro Tour event, because vibrating jigs work so good in cold water, and they catch big fish. So it'll definitely be something that I'm going to be looking at. I've always got one tied on.
This question is, do you sand down any crankbaits to make them look more natural?
Do I sand them to make them more natural? I really don't. You just really don't have to anymore. We've got so many different color patterns, and that if the shine of it bothers you, I guess you could try it, but I don't do it at all. I basically fish them right out of the package. The only real modifications I do to my Strike King crankbaits is I change the hooks out to those mustads, because that's just a huge confidence factor for me. I've just had so much success with them, but as far as changing the colors, I don't. I'll adjust them sometimes. I'll use some little paint pens or chartreuse markers, to brighten one up or to darken one up. But as far as sanding them, I just don't.
And then this one is kind of the same question, but it goes with jerkbaits too. Why do I have to tune crankbaits? So,
the one good thing, about a Strike King crankbait is they're all hand tuned. They tank tune, or they've got a tank, and they check the tune on them. So you shouldn't have one, but if you happen to hit a crankbait close to that eyelet or something, as you're running into something, you can actually knock one out of tune a little bit. The way you tune a crankbait is if the bait's running towards you and it runs, say it's running this way, you take that eyelet, take your pliers, and hang on, I got a pair of pliers. You take your pliers and just bend it just the slightest bit the opposite way that it's running, and you just try it again. And you want that bait to run straight. There's no doubt that it's very critical for your crankbait to be perfectly tuned. That's how it's going to be the most erratic, when it deflects off the bottom or the rocks or the cover that you're fishing. So tuning it is, it's paramount. I check every one before I throw them, and sometimes they may be off just 6 or 8 inches, and it's just a slight little adjustment, bending that eyelet just the opposite way can do that. I've also seen before that, if you bang it off a rock or the shoreline and you bend one of the eyelets on the bottom, it can throw it out of tune. So if your crankbait suddenly goes out of tune, look it over real close, make sure that all the eyelets are lined up, and one of them's not, been banged into, by a rock or something.
When watching the weather and you have wind, do you head to the bank where the wind is blowing, or do you go watch the watercolor and the depth?
I like to fish, around wind if I can. Sometimes it gets to be where it's too much, when it's really, really blowing. But wind is real positive. It cuts on light penetration. It'll move plankton, which the bait fish will feed on. It'll create activity. It moves water, creates current. Wind is usually a pretty positive thing. I know a lot of anglers like to get out of the wind, but I like to, if I can, and at just about any time, I'm going to be trying to fish where the wind is blowing. Early in the spring, wind can really warm up an area quickly, but it can also blow cold water in there too. So pay close attention to your temp gauge, but usually wind is a positive thing.
Is the spinnerbait you used to win the MLF championship in 2014 still available?
Yeah, so that is a spinnerbait that's available just at Bass Pro Shops. It's called a Scorcher. It's a KVD Scorcher. It comes in a 3/8, a half, and a 3/4 ounce size. So it's a little heavier wireframe. It's really a spinnerbait that I designed for burning for smallmouths. They're super aggressive, so you need a tough, durable bait, for it. And absolutely, that's a spinnerbait I still throw a tremendous amount to this day. Let's do one more question and we'll kind of wrap it up for the night.
Okay. Why not put, oh no, not a good question. Why wouldn't the bait manufacturers put better hooks on the bait so you don't have to change the hooks out of the box?
Well, one of the challenges with it, and Strike King does put, if you look at the baits now, they've got really good sharp needlepoint round bends on there. The trick or the challenge has been, especially now with COVID and all the supply chain issues, is supply. You know, to be able to put, you know, these must-add KVDs on every bait, first and foremost, they're a more expensive hook, so it does add cost to it. But beyond and above that, it's just being able to actually supply. So to me, I felt really good about being able to come out with this particular series with the hooks already on there, the way I like to fish them, you know, right out of the package. So it's a start, and hopefully we can get more series of baits, you know, after that, because I spend so much. I hate to tell you how many hundreds of thousands of hooks I've changed, you know, over the years. You know, that's why I designed this particular hook. So just for that reason. So it's my confidence deal, and but it does add some cost to the, you know, to the lure for sure, and not everybody's willing to pay that. So one thing that Strike King has always been just adamant about, you know, John Barnes, who is you know, really one of the founders of Strike King when we started really growing and building a lot more baits and coming up with all these crankbaits, and that is he wanted to provide baits with you know, that are really good high performance baits, that are tournament worthy baits, but also affordable, you know. So you'll see a lot of our baits are less money than the competitors, and you know, are better quality or have better action just for that reason. So that's part of the overall equation. So I love to not have to change it. At least you know, I've got a new series of jerk baits that I don't have to worry about it. They come right out of the package.
Last question.
Okay.
Are they available now?
They are available right now. Again, Bass Pro has 6 colors that are exclusive to them. You can look online and see the 6 colors that Bass Pro has. The other 6 are only available currently at DNR Sports right now. There's a limited amount of those that they came with. And again, you know, there's a really pretty bluegill, a smelt. We've got some really nice clear water colors, but we've also got, you know, a chartreuse siren, you know, so we've got a good mix of colors that I like to throw, and I design these for, you know, the type of situations that I like to fish in, and we've really got a pretty good lineup. They're pretty unique and very natural. So, man, I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Again, next Monday, we're going to start King of Bass Live, you know, for Strike King and Lose. We'll stream it on my Facebook as well. And it's going to be a series we're going to kick off. We're going to have a lot of fun. First guest, Mark Zona and Andy Morgan. And we're going to be kind of previewing the beginning of the season. First, the Bass Pro Tour event. And then shortly thereafter, the Elite Series kicks off on the St. Johns River. And so the season is upon us, and I'm pretty fired up. I'm pretty much ready to go. I got my brand new Tundra. It's actually in process right now. Everything's kind of been behind this year, been a little slow to get going, but I've got my boat loaded. I've got my tackle prepped, and I'm ready to go. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in.